The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Minneapolis City Planning Commission will now begin.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sam Rockwell. I serve as president of the Minneapolis Planning Commission. I will call this meeting to order on April 27, 2020. The time is 4:32. To start things off, I will ask the clerk to call the roll to confirm attendance, please.
Caprini. Maybe she's not here yet. Dunnick.
Here.
Smiley.
Here.
Lipkeep here.
Here.
Marwa.
Here.
Meyer.
Here.
Olson.
Here.
Schrader.
Here.
And Sweezy.
Here.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. We'll now proceed to our agenda. The agenda is available at LIMS, that's lims.minneapolismn.gov, for those of you who are watching or listening in and want to see the agenda. Our first order of business is to accept the minutes of the April 13th, 2020 Minneapolis City Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, may I have a motion? Commissioner Smiley.
I move to accept the minutes of the April 13th Minneapolis Planning Commission.
Commissioner Olson.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Dunnick.
Aye.
Smiley.
Aye.
Lipkeep here.
Aye.
Marwa.
Aye.
Meyer.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Sweezy.
Aye.
That's 8-0.
That motion carries. Our next order of business is to adopt the agenda for this meeting. I will walk through the agenda. I do not believe that we have any members of the public signed up to testify. If that has changed, let me know. The agenda of the meeting as proposed is as follows. Item number 4. I'm seeing that we have 5 callers. All right. Then I will work through this and we'll see if there are folks here who are looking to testify on some of these items. So item number 4 is the 8th Street Apartments at 800 Park Avenue in Ward 7. That item is recommended for consent. Is there anybody on the line wishing to testify against staff recommendation on the 8th Street Apartments? Seeing none, we'll place item number 4 on our consent agenda. Item number 5, which is the North Loop Green Phase 3. We will continue item number 5 to the May 11th meeting at a request by the applicant. So if there are folks on the line who are looking to testify to item number 5, that is continued to May 11th City Planning Commission hearing. Item number 6 is also continued to the May 11th, 2020 City Planning Commission hearing. That's 212th Avenue. I'm sorry, I'm looking over here. Item number 4. Does this mean that we have somebody on item number 4 who wishes to testify? The question for staff, or is this the applicant? All right, very good. So item number 4 will remain recommended for consent. Item number 5 continued to May 11th. Item number 6 continued to May 11th per staff recommendation. That concludes the items for our public hearing. The remaining discussion items are slated as follows. Item number 7 for discussion, but not public hearing. Item number 8 for discussion, but not public hearing. Item number 9 for consent. Item number 10 for discussion, not public hearing, and item number 11 for discussion, not public hearing. Those items for discussion, not public hearing, will not have a final decision by the commission today for those listening. So, commissioners, the agenda as amended is for discussion items 7, 8, 10, and 11. Continuing items number 5 and 6 to May 11th, and on the consent agenda, items number 4 and 9. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended? Commissioner Olson,
So moved.
Commissioner Lukey-Peer.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as amended. Clerk, please call.
Dunick,
Aye.
Smiley,
Aye.
Lipke-Peer,
Aye.
Marwa,
Aye.
Meyer,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Sweezy.
Aye.
It's 8-0.
That motion carries. Next, could I have a motion to continue items 5 and 6 to the May 11th City Planning Commission hearing? Commissioner Smiley,
I move to move items 5 and 6 to, or continue items 5 and 6 to the next planning commission meeting on May 11th.
Commissioner Lukey-Peer.
Second.
Clerk, we have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Dunick,
Aye.
Smiley,
Aye.
Lipke-Peer,
Aye.
Marwa,
Aye.
Meyer,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Sweezy.
Aye.
8-0.
Very good. That motion carries. Next, I will open the public hearing on our consent agenda, items number 4 and 9. I don't believe we have anybody wishing to testify in favor of those. If you do, speak now. Hearing nobody, I will close the public hearing on the consent agenda. Commissioners, could I have a motion to move, approve the consent agenda? Commissioner Smiley.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Commissioner Lukey-Peer.
Second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Dunick,
Aye.
Smiley,
Aye.
Lipke-Peer,
Aye.
Marwa,
Aye.
Meyer,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Sweezy.
Aye.
8-0.
That motion carries. Next, we'll move on to our discussion items. Our first discussion item is agenda item number 7, and staff is Rob Skelecki.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Rob Skelecki. I'm a city planner in the Historic Preservation section of CPED. I'm presenting a designation study for your comments today. The subject property is Joyce Memorial Methodist Church, located at 1219 West 31st Street in the South Uptown neighborhood. Do we have slides, please? Thank you. Next slide. CPED staff is recommending that Joyce Memorial Methodist Church be designated as a local historic landmark. Under criterion for local designation, staff finds that the property has significance under criterion 4 and criterion 6 for work of a master architect. Slide. Slide, please. Thanks. The future land use of the property is identified as urban neighborhood in the Minneapolis 2040 comprehensive plan. The area is currently low density residential, bordered to the west by medium density and some high density residential, with nearby commercial uses mainly along the Hennepin Avenue corridor, which is 2 blocks to the west, as well as the Lake Street corridor, which is a block to the north. The proposed designation would have no impact on the use of the subject property and would support the identified future land use for the area. Slide. The future built form for the property is identified as Interior 2 in Minneapolis 2040. The proposed designation would have minimal impact on the built form of the subject property. The property is an existing church that is much taller than 2.5 stories, which is the height limit in Interior 2 built form district. However, the church has been present on the parcel since 1907 and the property would remain non-conforming. In height, that is. The property does not exist within the boundaries of a small area plan or development plan adopted by the city council. It's also important to state that the current property owner has noted interest in developing the property as a multiple family residential building. Landmark designation would promote the history of Joyce Memorial Methodist Church relayed through its unique California mission revival style architecture and as an emblematic example of master architects Downs and Eads, who were known for creating significant revival styles at that time. The designation will preserve a rare piece of the city's architectural history in an area that experiences significant development pressures. Historic designation of the property would maintain the historic footprint, massing community prominence of Joyce Memorial as a neighborhood focal point at the notable intersection of West 31st Street and Fremont Avenue South. The following policies of Minneapolis 2040 would apply to the designation of Joyce Memorial Methodist Church. Policy 92, identify and evaluate historic resources. The California Mission Revival style is not currently represented in the body of Minneapolis's locally designated historic resources. The property has been identified as the city's best example of a church that retains and conveys significance to this particular style. Next slide, please. Policy number 60, intrinsic value of properties. Joyce Memorial Methodist Church is the only intact California Mission Revival style church in the city. Designation would allow for protection, increased awareness, appreciation, intrinsic and potential economic value of a unique piece of the city's architectural history. And also policy 93, stewarding historic properties. Local historic designation would encourage the retention and adapted reuse of the significant community resource and ensure guided change to the property under the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. With that, I will take any questions on the designation if you have any, but otherwise I'm looking forward to Thank you.
All right, commissioners, are there any questions for staff? I'm not seeing any questions. I am getting an echo. No, you are not the only person getting echoes, Commissioner Lippkeeper. All right, see no questions for staff. Thank you very much for that presentation. And commissioners, we could I have a motion to receive and file the historic designation report. Commissioner Olson and then Commissioner Marwa.
So moved.
So moved, the same.
We have a question on whether we need to receive and file or move support of the designation. Kimberly, are you on the line? Do you have any opinion on this? Kimberly.
If there are no comments, then we would like to see some support of the designation.
Very good. Then why don't we set aside the receive and file and seek a motion to move support of the designation. Commissioner Linkey-Pear.
I move to support the designation of the Joyce Memorial Methodist Church.
Commissioner Smiley.
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Assuming no further discussion, clerk, please call the roll.
Dunick,
Aye.
Smiley,
Aye.
Linkey-Pear,
Aye.
Marwa,
Aye.
Meyer,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Sweezy,
Aye.
8-0.
That motion carries. Next up, we have item number 8, the Lyndhurst Residential Historic District Designation Study. And city staff is Andrea Burke.
Good evening, commissioners. I am Andrea Burke and I am the supervisor for the historic preservation team in CPED. And I am here presenting also another designation study, although this time for a historic district in the Lyndhurst neighborhood. It is the Lyndhurst Residential Historic District. And I would be interested in receiving any comments you have either in support or in not support of this district. Next slide, please. In July 2019, the Heritage Preservation Commission placed a portion of the East Harriet and Lyndhurst neighborhoods under interim protection as a potential historic district after denying the demolition of a property at 4632 Emerson Avenue South. After surveying the study area, a local historic preservation consultant, New History, prepared a designation study that was completed in February of 2020. The study area surveyed by the consultant is bounded by 42nd Street West on the north, 48th Street West on the south, DuPont Avenue South on the east, and East Lake Harriet Parkway on the west. The study, however, recommends a smaller historic boundary of 46th Street West on the north, DuPont Avenue South on the east, 48th Street West on the south, and both sides of Fremont Avenue South on the west of the Lyndhurst neighborhood only. During the study, it became evident that the properties north of 46th Street West were larger in size and had more infill construction and substantial alterations. Next slide, please. The Lyndhurst Residential Historic District consists of 66 homes built between 1893 and 1937. The area encompasses homes that initially made up what's called the colony, which were 9 families that settled on land sold by Charles Loring and built homes consisting of costing at least $3,000. The colony remained relatively isolated until after 1905, when additional development was spurred by the arrival of the automobile. The city's emerging upper middle class chose popular architects to design their homes in various period revival styles. Linden trees covered the area and the lots were large enough to fit a large home and a separate garage. The historic district has excellent integrity as only 2 houses are recommended as non-contributing. Next slide, please. The historic district has significance under 3 local criteria. Criterion 3 for its large lots, mix of architectural styles popular with middle class in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as well as similarities in setbacks, scale, massing. The district features key character-defining elements of the neighborhood. Criterion 4 for its variety of period revival architectural styles that were popular during this time. Next slide, please. as well as criterion 5 for its development pattern as an early automobile suburb with large lots lined with linden trees and with houses sharing similar size, scale, architectural language, massing, and setbacks. Under Minneapolis 2040, the district is identified as urban neighborhood for future land use and is interior 1 in the built form overlay. The designation of Lyndhurst would have no impact on the use of the properties and would have minimal impact on the built form of the properties. Interior 1 guiding building heights between 1 and 2.5 stories. Next slide, please. 3 policies of Minneapolis 2040 would apply to the designation of Lyndhurst. Policy 60, Lyndhurst District represents one of the highest concentration of houses which retain historic integrity in the body of City of Minneapolis's designated properties, demonstrating the value of intact historic neighborhoods. Policy 92, Minneapolis doesn't have a historic district quite like Lyndhurst among its 18 currently designated districts. It's distinct because it represents a concentration of middle-class homes in popular period revival styles. The development of the district was dependent on the increased accessibility of the automobile to middle-class buyers as the development was not located near streetcar lines. And then policy 93, given the high degree of historic integrity in Lyndhurst, designation will encourage the maintenance and preservation of the houses within its boundaries. Next slide, please. The designation will preserve the unique architectural styles, large lots, setbacks, and character of the historic district and will encourage the retention of the houses of the same vintage in the surrounding neighborhood, thus demonstrating the effect of the designation on the surrounding area. As such, CPED is recommending the Lyndhurst Residential Historic District for local designation. The complex has significance under 3 local criteria and maintains excellent integrity. The State Historic Preservation Office has concurred with CPED's recommendation in their letter from last week. I am open to your comments, either in support or not for the district. Thank you very much. Also for any questions.
Commissioners, are there any questions or comments on this designation study? Commissioner Smiley.
I want to thank staff for this presentation. It's exciting to see these happening throughout the city. I did have a general question about the preparation of this study. And kind of wondering if this was initiated by the city or if this was initiated by the neighborhood and or residents of the area, and what that could potentially mean for other areas in the city that could easily date back that far. And just because they're like maybe they're unable to put that study together, they will not get that designation. So I'm just kind of wondering how that relationship works.
Sure. This study actually was started in response to a demolition that was proposed in that neighborhood. So under the ordinance, the Heritage Preservation Commission does have the powers to stop a demolition and commence a designation study. And so when that happened on the property at 46 and Emerson, the city chose to fund this particular designation study themselves. Some of the options that we have for these types of studies is either staff will present this, prepare the study themselves, and specifically my team, and we will do the research and the writing for the district, or the city has the option to hire out to a local consultant, and that's what we chose to do in this case because it was such a large district. With the study area being very large, I believe there was 216 properties in the study area. So we did hire out and we did pay a consultant in order to do this study. It varies per study, sometimes for individual properties. Sometimes if it's somebody that on the, like the study you just heard from Joyce Memorial Methodist Church, in that case, the developer was interested in designating the property, so they commissioned the study. In cases where the city steps in to deny a demolition and commence a study, oftentimes we will foot the bill for that, considering it was our choice to commence that study. In terms of other areas not necessarily having the funds, it's kind of give or take. Like I said, oftentimes when these happen, the city can do the study themselves, but if it's larger and we do have available funding, we will try to hire out for it. I hope that answers your question. If you have any more though, let me know.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Commissioners, are there any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I will entertain a motion of support on the Lyndhurst Residential Historic District Designation Study. Commissioner Smiley.
I move to support the Lyndhurst historic designation.
Commissioner Lubke-Beer.
I will second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Caprini. Maybe she didn't join. What did you say?
Kim Caprini, you can press *6 to unmute.
Dunick.
Aye.
Smiley.
Aye.
Lipke-Peer.
Aye.
Marwa.
Aye.
Meyer.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Sweezy.
Aye.
8-0.
That motion carries. Our next item on the agenda is item number 10, 2651 Chicago Avenue. The staff is Peter Crandall.
Good evening, Commissioners. Peter Crandall, Senior Planner with CPED Land Use. We're going to be looking at a couple of potential projects on the Alina and Abbott Northwestern campus in South Minneapolis. Both of these items are projects that would normally be reviewed in our less formal COW meetings, but we're bringing them tonight as informational items. So the memos that were prepared for you ahead of time are you'll be familiar with from COW and focus on the potential applications and then some questions that we're looking for feedback on from the Commission. In just a minute, yep.
Can I jump in quickly? Quick question. Is it easiest for you, based on your comment, most logical to review items 10 and 11 together?
I think we'll take them individually as projects for comments from the Commission because they deal with pretty different issues and sites. But in a minute, someone from Alina is going to give kind of an overview of how they fit into the general campus master plan. And there is a connection between how they're envisioning the development of the campus over time. So I'm going to start with the first project and go over staff's assessment of the policy and questions for review, and then we'll hand it over to the applicant and they can give some background as to the general campus plan and then to the project in more detail. So the first project that we're going to look at is at 2615 Chicago Avenue South. This is the main Abbott Northwestern Hospital campus. The site is currently zoned OR3, which is a zoning district that supports some of these larger institutional uses. We can go to the next slide, please. Next slide. The site is currently under the 2040 plan designated for public office and institutional uses and built form of Corridor 6. The portion of this somewhat larger parcel that we'll be looking at is directly at the corner of Chicago Avenue and 26th Street. Chicago is designated as a goods and services corridor in Minneapolis 2040, which in general supports active and commercial uses. Next slide, please. This aerial gives you an idea of the part of the campus that we're going to be focusing on for the first project. outlined in red here, again at the corner of 26th and Chicago. Next slide. So this is an image of the proposal. I'm going to let the applicant handle much of the detail about the design and how it relates to the campus as a whole, but essentially Abbott Northwestern is proposing to replace the existing central utility plant on the campus and construct a new one at the corner of 26th and Chicago. The current central utility plant is located just behind where you see this proposed structure, so a little bit further to the south along Chicago Avenue. That plant would continue to operate until the new plant gets constructed, and this new plant would replace two existing structures on the site that would be demolished as a part of this project. Next slide. So the applications that would be involved in this are conditional use permit for a new heating and cooling facility, conditional use permit to exceed the maximum building height in the OR3 district. And that's primarily due to the height of the cooling tower that's a part of the facility. Variance to reduce the minimum front yard along Chicago Avenue from 15 feet to 0 feet. A variance to reduce the minimum corner side yard along 26th Street from 15 to 0, and site plan review. Next slide. This is an image that kind of lays out the first floor plan. And again, we'll get more detail about this from the applicant in a minute, but it gives you an idea of some of the challenges that we're looking at from a site plan review perspective with a central utility plant located in such a prominent corner of the site. Much of the program, as you can imagine, is not especially active or conducive to activation of the public realm. And so the applicant has concentrated as much of the active space in the form of office space along Chicago and 26th at the corner there, and that would be where the principal entrance to the facility would be located. But the remainder of the program, being of a kind of sensitive and technical nature, is closed to the outside of the structure and largely inactive. Next slide. So you can see this axonometric of the building that kind of gives you an idea of the massing and materiality. Next slide. So staff is looking for feedback primarily on some design issues with the central utility plant, again, with the challenges being that a largely inactive program on a very prominent site does not conform to site plan review standards for having active uses of the ground floor along the public right-of-way, for incorporating visual interest into a building design in order to enhance the public realm and to mitigate any potential blank wall issues that arise from inactive architectural elevations. And again, Chicago Avenue is adopted as a goods and services corridor and would generally call for the implementation of publicly accessible active or retail uses along that street frontage. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it over to Tony from Alina, who will give kind of an overview of the campus master plan and how both of the projects that we're going to talk about tonight fit into that. And I believe he's waiting on the line.
Hi, this is Tony LaCroix-DeLune.
Tony, you can go ahead and just let them know when you're ready to change the slide.
Great. We can go to slide number 2, which says A&W current, please. So I've had the pleasure to lead a group that's been evaluating the Abbott Northwestern campus plans for the future for the next few years. A big part of our project has been creating structures that will be reliable to deliver care for decades to come. With our COVID-19 preparations, it's never been more clear how important it is to be ready for anything. So you can advance to the next slide. We've got 2 projects that were actually 3 projects we're going to talk about today, 2 that are the main focus. As you can see on the left side of the plans, there's the cup there, and on the right hand side there's the transportation hub. Both of these are fairly essential projects for our campus. The central utility plants will replace a lot of aged equipment that will be essential to have new equipment to provide reliability for our campus. The transportation hub on the bottom half is essentially a parking ramp with some active space on the ground floor. It's important in that you can see there's a green box there over our current ramp 1, our main parking ramp. We made a commitment to our neighborhood many years ago to stay within our current boundaries. So essentially construction on our campus requires tearing something down to build something else. So a main driver for us building this transportation hub is to allow us to tear down ramp number 1 and build a new patient care building there, which will house some essential services such as our operating rooms and other critical care services. Next slide. In this slide, you can see that ramp 1 is down, and then there's a new patient care tower in that spot. So essentially, these two projects are setting the stage so that we can get to that project at some point in the future. Very essential. Our campus is pretty old. We've actually been on the site since 1882. It's important to point out that in addition to this large campus, just to the south of us, our corporate office lives at the Midtown Exchange Building. They've just recently updated their lease through 2037. So we have a pretty big presence in this neighborhood, and we see that as an honor and also a responsibility to really do things right. Next slide, please. Part of this process, as we've been working through this for the last few years, we've had a lot of meetings with our community and our local leaders. We've been really focused on being transparent and engaging our partners and really learning from them. So we've had 21 meetings and presentations over the last 9 months with a lot of local groups, a lot of local leaders, and we've really taken their input to heart, and we feel like we've really incorporated their input into these designs. As Peter said, some of these buildings have a very industrial nature to them, and we've worked really hard to have something that will look good in our neighborhood. So I'll stop there, and Mike can take over for the cup project.
Hi, this is Mike McGannon. I'm an architectural design principal with HDR. Thanks for the chance to walk you through the design of the central plant. As Abbott approached this project, we took inspiration from this Eero Saarinen quote you see about always designing by considering a thing in its next larger context. In that spirit, we believe it's important to not only make this an integral part of their hospital campus, but also to ensure that it enhances the streetscape, the surrounding neighborhood, and the overall community of Minneapolis. Our intent here is to create a quietly elegant and functionally efficient design that anchors and complements this prominent corner of the medical campus while continuing to reflect Alina's high quality of care. Next slide, please. These images of the Abbott Northwestern Hospital campus with the photo at the top center shows the main entry court looking north along 28th Street, actually from ramp 6. Although the proposed central plant will not be seen from this entry court, for many people who do approach the campus, it will be their first impression. For that reason, we believe it should have a welcoming appearance that does not feel like it's the back door of any campus. The challenge is to achieve Abbott's desire for the plant to have a positive visual impact, but not so much that it itself is mistaken as a patient destination. And as you can see here, while all of these campus buildings form a diverse set of architectural expressions, all of them are pretty seamlessly tied together by a single material, a warm reddish blend of brick that carries forward a comforting and reassuring identity for the campus. Next slide, please. So this image is looking south on Chicago Avenue at the intersection with 26th Street. The existing 6-story brick building you see at the corner is the Harriet Walker office building. It and the education building just to its left, and it's actually hidden behind that tree, will be replaced by the proposed central utility plant. This intersection serves as a visual gateway to the medical campus when one is traveling southbound on Chicago Avenue. just as a transportation hub, it will serve as a gateway when traveling northbound. The new plant presents an opportunity to enliven the streetscape from this point, and it will be that first impression, as I said, for many coming to the campus. In the background, just off to the right, you can see the existing plant further along Chicago Avenue. Next slide, please. So this image shows a closer view of the present plant. The existing plant is a very simple utilitarian building with a long horizontal facade with few openings and little transparency. It is, however, enlivened by this pin dot pattern of bricks you see on the right. These pin dots create an ever-changing pattern as the shadows glide across the red brick and really enliven that facade throughout the day. Next slide. So this axonometric shows an aerial view of the sites of the plant. In blue are the buildings that will be coming down. Chicago Avenue is off to the right, 26th is off to the left. Since the proposed central plant is a very functionally driven building, it's important to understand how the interior and the exterior relate to one another so that the building is simultaneously designed from the inside out as well as the outside in. Otherwise, if the exterior were designed in a vacuum without regard for the interior functions, the result would be a massive box with little interest to offer the hospital campus or the surrounding neighborhood. The images that follow here will illustrate how the proposed plant is functionally organized on its interior. Next slide. So this is that same image we saw a bit ago of the first level. And I do want to stress that this new plant will provide heating, cooling, steam, electricity, and emergency power to the entire medical campus. On the first level, the staff space is shown in the light yellow at the corner of Chicago and 26th. And at the same time, immediately adjacent to it, but behind it in red, you can see the space for the emergency generators. Our goal is to open up that corner as much as possible with floor-to-ceiling glass for that staff space you see, but then to provide substantial buffering to minimize any acoustic impact from the generators. So that transparent facade of the staff space consists nearly entirely of glass, and we've recessed it to provide some weather protection and add some visual interest at that front door, some shadow lines. Next slide, please. So as we go up one level, you can see the hospital has chosen to invest in shelf space for expected growth in staff. So that has allowed us to provide even more floor-to-ceiling glass along a transparent cantilevered spine that you see, again, activating the corner. This floor-to-ceiling glass spine pushes itself out to also provide some weather shelter and to break down the scale of the plant. Next slide, please. The third level is the top enclosed level of the building. It's almost entirely electrical equipment at this point, with other equipment off toward the east of the building. Here, you can see we're now above that second floor glass spine, but there will be a thin horizontal louver that will also enhance the facade and break down the scale. As we go to the next slide, so now this shows the entire building and the distribution of exterior materials. The eastern half of this 26th Street facade, that is really the main body of the plant itself, consists of brick with a renewed pin dot pattern, while the western half, that is mainly the people spaces that address the corner, consists of extensive glass with white metal panel and brick accent. The cantilever glass spine on the Chicago Avenue side projects from the second floor, and then it bends around the corner to stretch to the east toward 26th Street, and it visually ties together the plant functions on the left and the people spaces on the right. Next slide. So this rendering shows the ultimate design it refreshes this northern gateway to Abbott's campus in a way that enhances the neighborhood. And through its dual expressions of the plant and the people spaces, it utilizes the PennDOT brick cladding to tie it back to the campus, while its taut metal skin lightens and balances the overall appearance to give a nod to the future for the campus. Thanks.
All right. Peter, do you want to add anything further, or should I open it up to staff here? It's odd not to be able to see everybody.
We can just go ahead and open it up for comments from the commission.
Very good. Commissioners, comments, questions, etc. Commissioner Luke Dupier.
Yeah, I had a few questions for the applicants. I was wondering if they could maybe elaborate a little bit on whether or not any of the functions in those, the generator spaces and the electrical floors, are any of those, I can see why you would not care if people could see in or out from a functional standpoint, but is any of that equipment actually light sensitive to where having light or something that would give it a more pedestrian scale would harm the equipment, or is this just that way?
Question for the applicant. If you're speaking, I think you're muted.
Peter, would you like me to take that one?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so most of the equipment is not light sensitive in any way. Some of it's sensitive from the standpoint of it's pretty essential emergency equipment for our hospital, so we have extra concerns about making sure it's extra secure and sort of fortified from the outside, whether that be from weather or anything else. So no, that to answer your specific question, the equipment is not light sensitive. A lot of the equipment does have light on all night long though, so we're sensitive to light pollution with windows around the equipment.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Olson, you had a question or comment.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, I have a question, or I guess a comment for the applicant. I'm just wondering, you know, the blank wall in Chicago is my primary concern. Is there any way you could just redistribute the existing office space to make that whole Chicago front active while maintaining the same amount of square footage for that use?
Question for the applicant there on the distribution of the office space.
Yes, this is Zach Rubik with KFI Engineers, working with Mike McGinn, who was speaking earlier from HDR. The program of the personnel space in this plant is somewhat limited. So the square footage, if we were to extend that too far to the west, would we would not have enough personnel space to extend that the entire way. Some of the equipment on the eastern side of the plant as well requires nearly all of that space that goes from north to south. So extending that personnel space would impede on those pieces of equipment. And Mike, you may want to chime in here. I know the exterior design team is looking at other ways to break up that northern face on the east side of the building as well.
Yes, we're still studying the brick patterning on there. We expect it will be something very similar to this, but we're still looking at what the appropriate scale is there to break down that facade a little more.
And to be clear, I believe Commissioner Olson's comment was less about expanding the amount of office space, but rather a re-engineering of the geography within the building shell itself, so that that office space was, question being, could that office space just be reallocated entirely along the Chicago Avenue facade? Commissioner Olson, correct me if I'm wrong there.
No, that's correct. That's what I was asking. Even if some of the second floor space could just be moved to the first floor. But yeah, not changing the amount of that space, just redistributing it.
Is there a technical equipment related barrier to a reallocation of that space?
This is Mike.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Well, all I was going to say was a lot of the equipment here is pretty substantial in size, and so we try to keep the heavy structure localized in one spot and the lighter structure, that is the people spaces, localized in a different part.
So it's an engineering preference, but not necessarily, and certainly easier, but not necessarily a need from a shape or functionality standpoint.
This is Zach with KFI Engineers again. There is, while there are some benefits from the structure, there are requirements, mechanical requirements of the equipment that is driving some of the spacing at this point. But we can certainly look at seeing if it is a possibility and report back. We have looked at several arrangements of this building in that area, and we have not yet found one that allows the equipment and the personnel space to fit within the footprint of the site while still activating the corner area and distributing that personnel space.
Very good, thank you. Commissioner Lupke-Pierre.
Yes, I just had a few more questions for the applicant. One was related to the Saarinen quote you had earlier at the beginning of your presentation that was in regard to enhancing the streetscape and the surrounding neighborhoods. And I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about that, because it seemed as though this building has a direct relationship to your campus, maybe with an updated architectural vocabulary, but it didn't seem to really have any sort of enhancing features to the neighborhood. So I wondered if you could talk about that, because I didn't quite get that disconnect. And then I have another question afterward.
Sure. One of the things we think this does much more successfully than the Harriet Walker building is that it does address that corner in a much stronger way. If you remember the Harriet Walker image, the photo of the gateway, it shows a very understated, almost minimal, unnoticeable entrance door along 26th Street at the center of the building facade. We feel that this one, the proposed plant, by turning to the corner and making that entire facade floor to ceiling glass, and then having the cantilevered glass spine above that be floor to ceiling glass, we think that does create a much stronger identity and accent and visual interest at the corner. And in that way, we think going from the existing building on site to what we're proposing, we think that does actually open up the facade quite a bit.
And then, so related to that, and I'm hoping staff could bring up the image of that rendering on the corner so we can look at it really quick. I just want to say, I think that the massing of your building as its own thing is actually, it's a successful massing in terms of how you balance the glass and the brick that you had. But I think that the larger concern that we have is that we rarely allow for such an extensive amount of blank wall. And so I think I would like to know if you can address a little bit about what, can we go one floor up higher so it shows the finished building? I think it's like 3 slides after this. I'm wondering about what the pedestrian experience is walking along both streets. I don't really think of this as a gateway because I think traffic approaches this building from the opposite end of both blocks. Is that not accurate?
yes, I mean, traffic
Yeah.
approaches this from the north.
So
South.
I don't really think it's a gateway. I do think you're right about it addressing the corner, but we still have these large swaths of essentially brick fortress, a wall on a significant portion of each side of the building that faces a public street. So I'm wondering what your plans are to mitigate that, other than the pin dot thing, which is a very nice texture, but doesn't really get to the whole addressing that more eyes on the street sense of safety. And then also, if you could maybe outline in terms of the campus itself, who might be walking past this building from where, to determine, whether or not this is going to be something that's going to be impacting pedestrians on a regular basis, or is this more of almost like a back service street to where anyone on campus won't really be walking there? I'm trying to get a sense of this facade. And actually, if we can go one more elevation up on the slides, that'd be great. Thanks.
Well, as far as relieving the scale of the wall, certainly I think the brick pattern is one way that contributes to that. I think, but more than that, and really in combination with it, a slide we didn't see was the landscape plan. And it is our intent to have landscaping along both of those brick facades that you see on Chicago and on 26. And in fact, for the facade on 26, it will essentially turn into its own natural green wall, because we are proposing planting ivy there that will climb onto these pin dots.
So you're saying that the texture of the wall is your mitigation for the blank wall provision?
To some degree it is, combined with the landscaping. We had earlier proposed opening the wall up quite a bit and adding a lot of glass, but there was community concern about the light pollution, because these spaces are lit 24 hours a day, and we wanted to be respectful of that as well.
And what's across the street from where those openings would be, though, that would receive that light pollution? Because I'm thinking of a hospital campus that's kind of a 24/7 kind of environment anyway. I mean, granted, more busy during the day, but emergencies happen a lot. Workers are coming and going. So what are there houses? What's directly across from these facades that would be impacted by that?
Directly across from the 26th Street facade is an office building. Directly across from the Chicago facade are single-family homes.
Okay, so on the largest facade, though, it's an office building that probably no one's going to be there at night to see any light pollution. It's just the Chicago site, which is the shorter of the brick walls, that would maybe be more impacted. Is that correct?
I think that is accurate. I think there was also some concern just about dark sky pollution, but you're certainly correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Sweezy.
Thank you. Commissioner Lukey-Peer had a lot of the comments that I would raise. I'd just like to add my voice to it. First of all, I think that this is a good project and a necessary project. I know your hospital, and it certainly needs some updating and modernizing and all of that. And I get with that obviously comes, it's an institution, so it's going to have some institutional feel to it. I agree though about these blank walls, and I'm not sure that as rendered there's sufficient mitigation for me in it. I tend to not be the biggest believer in the green wall as a substitute for that. And so I agree that particularly along the Chicago Avenue frontage, there's a bus stop there, so there will be people there. I would like to see something other than that blank wall. Again, understanding that this is an institutional thing and that this has to go somewhere, and we understand that. But the parking in the other areas don't bother me. I think the new building's exciting, but this for me remains a little bit problematic for all the reasons that Commissioner Lukey-Peer mentioned. Thank you.
Commissioner Schematic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I kind of share the same concerns with not being 100% satisfied with the blank wall solution, especially considering the weather and how that green will not be green for half of the year anyway. So it doesn't seem to be a permanent solution. And I'm hoping that the applicant can come up with additional mitigation strategies for the blank wall concern. But also if the green panel or vine or whatever it is that is going to end up on that wall, if that does become part of the solution, that my question at that point was, would that be similar to what is rendered on the, I know we're discussing number 10 on the agenda, but with the parking on number 11 of the agenda, there is that kind of a green wall rendering, and I was wondering if that was the same concept that was being talked about.
At this point, no, that was not the intent. The intent was to keep this a little bit more naturalistic.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lipke-Peer.
Yes, the feedback I want to give, I just, and off the cuff, I don't think I have a problem with the CUPs that are being requested. I'm wondering what the setback variance amount is. I didn't, I'm scrolling back and forth 13 pages, so I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm hoping it's enough to allow for the applicant mentioned the landscaping plans that aren't shown. I hope it's substantial enough to make that more of a pedestrian friendly environment. So I'll leave it to them to communicate with staff, I guess, for next time we see this to remain convinced. The one thing that I guess I'd like to see, I know we're, you know, Commissioner Sweezy brought up a good point. This is an institutional building and it's a necessity. Generators are necessary. I am wondering, rather than thinking in terms of grandiose gestures of ways you could impact this facade, if you could, almost how you considered that pinprick brick patterning as a texture, could you think of something just even at the first floor level that would maybe make smaller punched openings in your masonry facade? That way, to a pedestrian, it wouldn't feel like you're walking along this 4-story monolithic wall. I think that maybe would be the tiny gesture there might be enough in my mind to kind of balance the two, the fact that it's an industrial purpose with the fact that it's so harsh as a human being at that scale. So could you talk about that just a little bit?
We could certainly explore that as a way to break down that scale at the pedestrian level. And I think something like that would be appropriate.
It would also impact your light pollution too. You know, if it was something more smaller and human scale rather than, you know, to balance those elements that you have, it would, you know.
Yes. The space along 26th Street would look into some fairly substantial volumes, which I think would be interesting. Along Chicago Avenue, they're fairly small. And I think my concern there just might be a little bit of the noise pollution in addition to light, but I think we can certainly look at a way to articulate that brick and perhaps create some openings if it's acceptable to the technology that's behind those walls.
I think that'd be interesting, and I think maybe even just selecting views, because the reality is most people in their lifetimes will visit a hospital, but not very many will actually know all of the nuts and bolts that go into making it work. So it's almost an interesting way to remind people that it takes a lot more than what they see to make this happen. So I would encourage pursuing that, at least in my personal opinion. I don't know if my other commissioners feel the same way.
Commissioners, any further comments for the applicant or questions? I'm not seeing any. You know, I'll just to sort of sum up, we've got, you know, obviously the blank walls are taking up a fair amount of discussion here. And, you know, whether that's looking at redistributing some of those office spaces and more active spaces so that they continue to hold the corner, or moving those onto Chicago Avenue. But moving the spaces from 26th onto Chicago Avenue if possible, and starting to shed some light, literally and figuratively, on what is happening inside the building as a way of creating some interest. You know, and I would, I guess, add on a personal note, this is an important institutional use. I think that there are ways of really stepping up how these buildings work in the urban context, and thinking of the building not just as a vessel, but as kind of a work of art in these times when you need something that is kind of inherently has blank walls, like you know, the salt shed in New York City, or there are other examples as well where there's something interactive. The building itself is really thought of differently. I'm not convinced that the brick articulation is really kind of making up for what this needs to be active. We can move on to item number 11, 2801 Chicago Avenue, and staff is Peter.
Thank you. The next project that we're going to look at is just down Chicago to the south from the central utility plant. This is at 2801 Chicago Avenue. And we'll be looking at an addition to a very significant addition to an existing parking garage with some additional active uses. We can go to the next slide. Did we lose the presentation there? Okay, thanks. The site is also zoned OR3. It's located at the corner of 28th and Chicago, and adjacent to the Midtown Greenway, which you can see along the south edge of the property there. It includes one large parcel, which currently contains an existing parking ramp and a large existing surface parking lot. And then there's a smaller parcel, liner parcel to the Midtown Greenway, which is just to the south of the property that is currently owned by the city of Minneapolis and which the applicant is seeking to purchase to incorporate as a part of this project. Next slide, please. The future land use guidance under 2040 for this site is similar to the previous site that we looked at, in that the land use guidance is for public office and institutional uses. However, the built form allows for up to 10 stories in height under the Transit 10 category. It should be noted that the parcel immediately to the south of the larger parking parcel, the liner parcel to the Midtown Greenway, is currently guided for parks and open space uses in the 2040 plan. Next slide. This gives you a sense of where that structure will be located in relationship to the remainder of the Alina and Abbott Northwestern campus. You can see at the corner of 28th and Chicago there is that existing ramp, and then the surface lot adjacent to the Midtown Greenway. Next slide. So the applicant is proposing to construct 2 additional stories onto the existing parking ramp at the corner of 28th and Chicago, which you can see kind of in the background on the left-hand part of this slide. And then the bulk of this rendering illustrates a new 8-story parking facility at the corner of Chicago and the Midtown Greenway. The facility will add a significant amount of new parking to the campus. However, it is also, I believe, designed to replace some of the parking that will be lost with that ramp that's being demolished to make way for new medical facilities at the center of the campus, which we saw earlier in the summary of the master plan. Next slide. So the applications associated with this project are a conditional use permit for principal parking facility, conditional use permit to exceed the maximum building height in the OR3 district, and that's to go from 6 stories to 8 stories, variance to the maximum floor area ratio from 3.5 to 6.85, a variance to reduce the minimum front yard along Chicago Avenue in the OR3 from 15 feet to 5 feet, a variance to reduce the minimum rear yard along the east property line from 15 feet to 0 feet, and then site plan review. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I've just marked up this rendering to illustrate some of the issues that staff is seeking feedback on from the commission with regard to this project. Site plan review standards, which were recently adopted and amended for parking garages, call for active uses, not just at the ground floor, which had been our policy for a long time, but also along the entire elevations fronting along public streets. This particular proposal is proposing an active use at grade along Chicago between the 2 vehicle access points, and the program for that is yet to be determined. And then as you can see along the Midtown Greenway, the applicant is proposing some green walls and climbing vines as an integrated part of the elevation in order to mitigate some of the blank wall effect adjacent to that Greenway corridor. And then staff and the applicant had discussed at a couple of different points along in our communications about the potential for incorporating additional Greenway connections from Chicago to the Midtown Greenway. The applicant will address some of that in their presentation as it relates to some of the other connections in the neighborhood, but there currently is a connection on the other side of the Greenway from the parking garage to the Greenway. It's a somewhat circuitous stairway connection, so it's not like a direct bicycle ramp as exists a little bit further to the east of here on Hennepin County property, and then a little bit further to the west of here onto Park in Portland. But that parcel that's currently owned by the city and which is guided for parks and open space does provide some opportunity to think through that as a possibility. Next slide. So I will turn it over to the applicant here to go over the design a little bit more, and then we can take questions.
Thank you, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please state your name and address.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sam. My name is Ben Henderson. I'm with Kimley Horn and Associates. I'm the project manager on this project. Commissioners, thank you for the time this evening. I'm going to start with slide 1, which is titled Project Site. So I might cover a little bit of ground that Peter just covered, but just want to make sure everyone is adequately oriented. So the project site is located at the south end of the Abbott Northwestern Hospital campus. It's south of 28th Street and east of Chicago, and just north of the Midtown Greenway, as Peter was sharing with us. The right image on this slide, it shows an aerial of the existing site, which is comprised of a surface parking lot and some access drives. One of the drives at the north side of that surface lot provides access to the south side of the existing ramp 6, and the other provides access to a truck loading dock facility at the 10th Avenue facility on the east side of this block, which is a laboratory and material receiving space for the hospital. Next slide, please. So to get you oriented, first, north is to the left on this image. The Transportation Hub project includes expanding the existing ramp 6 vertically, which is roughly in the center of this image, by 2 floors, and then constructing a new parking ramp directly south of ramp 6, which would be to the right in this image, and that is bordered in that yellow dashed line. And just to quickly note a few other buildings in the surrounding vicinity, just for context. Again, the Midtown Greenway is directly south or to the right of the project site in that yellow dashed line type. And across the Midtown Greenway is the Sheraton Hotel. And south of that is the Metro Transit Chicago Lake Bus Transit Center. And then you'll see the Midtown Exchange building that's to the right of this image, just a little south and east of our site. Next slide, please. Here's a schematic plan for the ground level of the transportation hub. Ramp 7, the new facility, is shown in color, and the existing layout for ramp 6 is on the left side, shown in gray. Again, north is to the left on the graphic. So these 2 ramps will ultimately function as one transportation hub. And you can see in green on the right side of that image that the existing truck dock will be maintained under ramp 7. And you'll see that the existing access in blue to ramp 6 will be maintained and will be utilized for access to both ramp 6 and 7 using the same access points. Next slide, please. Here's a rendering of the transportation hub as seen from the Chicago Avenue Bridge over the Midtown Greenway on the southwest side of the site. The architecture here really draws in a lot of different environments that are happening at this corner of the campus, which include obviously the green landscape of the Midtown Greenway, while successfully activating the frontage along Chicago Avenue and really creating a cohesive feel between the 2 facilities, which will ultimately now be one transportation hub. And you'll notice in this image, you see the truck leaving the truck loading facility in the access point closest to us, that now that that existing loading dock is covered, it's really screened from view. So it really does a great job of kind of softening this corner of campus while bringing in the greenway and activating the street frontage. Next slide, please. In this image, we've zoomed in just a little bit closer to the west side of the transportation hub. So this is the activated space on the ground floor. The top image is looking northeast, and the bottom image is looking southeast towards the same area of the facade on that west face. The space between the entrance into the transportation hub, which is noted parking entry in the southern image, the lower image here, and that located between the truck loading dock access to the south will really be the active office and retail space. We really want this space to be a real meaningful part of the community. And for that reason, we've been very intentional about who might occupy this space. We're actually in active conversations with several prospective tenants, including the Greenway Coalition and Our Streets Minneapolis, who have both responded very positively to the idea of being in this space. So we're really excited about that. Next slide, please. So staying in the same area of the site, we show some images here, one of the existing sidewalk on the upper image, and then the lower image, the proposed condition. The existing sidewalk along Chicago Avenue is approximately 12 feet wide in this area. And as you can see in the upper image, it contains power poles that support existing overhead power lines. We're going to be removing the overhead power lines and the power poles, and we'll be widening the sidewalk to approximately 18 feet in this area, which will certainly make it a much more comfortable and inviting pedestrian experience. Additionally, the existing curb cut at the entrance into the parking ramps will be narrowed by 5 feet to make that crossing an even safer crossing for pedestrians. The design team is also reviewing different solutions for improved pedestrian safety at the entries and exits from and into the facility, which will include likely signage and messaging to vehicles to increase awareness as they approach the crossing, and appropriately locating access control equipment within the parking garage to control vehicle speeds as they exit the facility. Next slide, please. To address the intent of the zoning requirement that the top level of the parking area be screened as viewed from above, the top level of ramp 7 will be screened with a roof, which also screens part of ramp 6, most of ramp 6, I should say, as viewed from the highest habitable floor of the Midtown Exchange building, which is located to the southeast of our site. So you can kind of see in the image that we've provided, this is that perspective. And you can see that there's a roof over ramp 7, which screens from view because of the higher elevation of ramp 7, most of ramp 6 as well. The next closest high-rise building within the view shed of the transportation hub is the 17-story Ebenezer Park apartment building, which is located about 3 blocks away to the northeast, which will really have a very limited view of the top of ramp 6. And you can see those apartment buildings in the upper left corner of this image. Next slide, please. As Peter explained really well, the transportation hub is located immediately north of the Midtown Greenway. The graphic right here below the text on this slide shows approximately where the transportation hub sits with regard to many of the connections to the Midtown Greenway in the immediate area. The image on the right shows just a few of those existing connections that exist within a few blocks of the transportation hub. One of the existing connections, as Peter mentioned, is a connection to Chicago Avenue, which is directly south of the project site. So being that so many existing connections already existed to city streets, the design team were reviewing different options to improve the connectivity to the Midtown Greenway and that important asset. And as we're identifying different options, really the focus was to improve the experience and the existing connectivity for bikers to Abbott Northwestern through the freewheel bike shop, which is located on the Midtown Greenway. And I'll show you exactly where that's at on the next slide. Next slide, please. The left image on this slide shows the location of the Greenway connection to the freewheel bike shop, which is just to the east of the transportation hub. The right image shows the location of the existing bike storage and locker rooms within the freewheel bike area. We're working with Freewheel to understand what possible improvements we can make, which Alana is fully committed to making. Next slide, please. Now I'll just talk briefly about the proposed architectural facade. You've obviously seen it in the renderings, but we'll talk just a little bit more here. This is the south facade, which faces the Midtown Greenway. This facade will be made up of perforated metal panel, which are shown in gray, some limited amounts of precast shown beige in color to break up the metal panel, and then border the vegetated wall system, which will include planters and climbing vines to create a green wall that will really pull in the aesthetic of the Midtown Greenway and soften and break up this elevation. Next slide, please. This is the west facade, which faces Chicago Avenue. This elevation will be comprised of metal panel and precast to pull in some of the architectural components of the south facade, but meld the existing architectural approach of ramp 6 into ramp 7 to create one cohesive approach on this elevation. Next slide, please. And lastly, here is the north elevation, which is adjacent to or directly south of 28th Street. The approach to this elevation is to leave much of the north side of the existing structure in its existing condition and add metal panel to the north side of the expanded levels of ramp 6, which are 2 levels above, and level 8 and the roof of ramp 7, which are shown beyond in the lighter gray. Again, this will create a cohesive architectural approach for the entire facility. And lastly, we'll end on the rendering again, looking at the southwest corner of the transportation hub. Take any questions.
Commissioners, questions, comments, etc. for the applicant. Commissioner Luke here.
Hi, so I have a few questions and they kind of jump all over, so sorry about that in advance. So number one, on the south facade, you mentioned there's a perforated metal panel. And I was just wondering, what is the patterning of it? Is this just a generic grid, or is this some sort of overall larger vision? We've been seeing a lot of different textures being introduced into facades this way in recent projects. So I'm just wondering if you have selected that yet, or if that's not something you're exploring.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Luke here. Yeah, we're still looking at the perforation panel, pattern and sizes. Obviously, from a openness standpoint, we need to maintain openness of the parking facility. Mm-hmm. But at this point, we haven't necessarily assessed different patternings associated with the metal panel itself. At this point, it's been proposed to be more of a consistent pattern of openings.
Okay, I mean, I think I would be, I'd be interested to hear what my fellow commissioners think of the green wall, climbing wall thing going on, but almost as an artistic element as well, just to kind of make the whole facade interesting, especially given our current appreciation for the medical workers and first responders who are there. Just might be an interesting opportunity for art in a not loud way. So there's that. Secondly, you mentioned there's an 18-foot wide sidewalk along the street. And I was just wondering, again, I didn't get a chance to see the landscape drawings for this, but is it more than just the 4 little tree islands shown, or is there increased landscaping that goes along with that 18 feet?
Yeah, at this point, we've been proposing that we move towards the tree grate solution, which is consistent along Chicago Avenue, and try to widen the sidewalk up to the face of the building and create just a wider pedestrian environment. Where a lot of the landscaping then happens on the south facade of the building.
Okay, and I guess I'd be curious if that's if there's a planting plan or strategy along that avenue that should be consistent that way, or whether it'd be nicer to kind of green it up a little bit leading to the Greenway. But I'll leave that to staff discussion. I did have a question about the distance of the curb cuts. How wide are they in terms of a pedestrian having to cross them at those 2 locations, both the loading and the vehicular areas?
That's a good question, Commissioner. I don't have the number off the top of my head, and I'd hate to give you just a number. I'm going to say, though, just for order of magnitude, that we're in the ballpark of 36 to 40 feet at the north entry access point and about 30 feet at the truck loading dock access point. And as we indicated before, we'll keep those widths the same as they are today or narrower as it relates to the entry exit into the parking structure.
Okay, and I think you can probably talk with staff a little bit too about when we see other projects with widths this expansive, it helps to have some sort of breathing space at a midpoint or some point in there for pedestrians, or that it's big enough for a person pushing maybe a stroller or a wheelchair to get sanctuary or respite. In the 40 feet's a lot to cross when you're just trying to walk down the sidewalk. So just I'll leave.
Understood. Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we've actually been investigating that as it relates to the function of the facility and maybe incorporating something like that. So appreciate the comment.
And then my last question, just related, I think, to the precast. It's shown in the renderings as kind of a salmon colored pink. Is that the precast, and is that really the color? I'm just curious.
It generally reflects the existing color of ramp 6, but the intent is that we'll match the color as closely as possible to the existing precast that's on ramp 6.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Olson.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. So I just want to make sure I understand correctly. The increase in parking stalls overall is 865. Is that correct?
Approximately, yes, that is correct.
So I was reading the packet, and it said that the need for parking stalls right now was 380 stalls. Can you talk a little bit about how you are projecting your need for future car stalls?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner. So as was laid out earlier in this presentation, there's a parking ramp 1 that will be coming down in anticipation of a future bed tower facility. And as that ramp comes down, we'll lose roughly 850 stalls out of ramp 1. With our current deficit that we have on campus and the increased growth and ultimately the increased demand, this parking structure will fulfill the needs of the campus through approximately 2026 as we're currently projecting them. And that's with Alina's commitment to reducing single occupancy vehicles campus-wide, which is the reason Alina is so very committed to increasing the amount of bicycle usage and other alternative mobility options for both their customers and their patients, as well as their staff. So I hope that answers this question.
Yeah, thank you. One other question. So the bicycle storage is only located in the existing free wheel bike storage facility, is that right?
Yeah, off of the Greenway going north, that is where a lot of the stalls and lockers are located, correct?
Okay, so are you going to be expanding that space, or I mean, how are you anticipating how many parking stalls you'll need for bicycles as well?
Yeah, we're doing studies right now, which include some benchmarking and talking with Alina as we drive towards a reduction of single occupancy vehicles. The intent is to increase the number of bike storage options within the free wheel bike area. and improve the facilities within that area to enhance the bike user experience, to really encourage that to happen more and more as staff are using that, hopefully more frequently, to get to campus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Marwa.
Hi, quick question. Just Commissioner Luke here kind of mentioned this, but about the green wall, when it's not in season and not, seasonally acceptable to be green up there, have you thought about alternative kind of art measures that you're planning to put? I mean, you could do with that kind of grading that you have, a lot of different yarn bombs and temporary kind of cool public art. Have you thought about that, or allowing that, or found partnerships in that realm?
Commissioner Marwa, I think it's a great comment. I'd have to defer some of that to my architectural partners. However, I know we have talked about the challenges of off-season color and trying to draw in that green effect, and we're still working through solutions to try to address some of that. And I'm sure as we continue to develop the design further, that is something that we want to continue to obviously leverage the green wall in all seasons of the year as much as possible to try to break up that facade. So I'll certainly take that comment and move that forward into our design process.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lipke-Peer.
Hi, I'm sorry, my connection fizzled out a little bit during Commissioner Olson's question. So if you already addressed this, my apologies. But I had a question about, you talked about the future, or you were talking about the future of trying to reduce single occupancy vehicle usage on the campus. And I was just wondering also what efforts are you going to in regard to e-vehicle charging, just given the possibly future autonomous vehicles that will be in theory floating around our city. So can you talk a little bit about charging stations and what your vision is for that in this ramp?
Absolutely. Yep. Alina is very committed to being progressive in that front, and we've been talking about the program. The goal generally is to try to strive for about 1% of all stalls, and that's our intent at this point in time, that they would have the ability to charge EV vehicles.
I mean, I guess I would say with the FAR you're requesting, 1% seems pretty light, because it's what, 800 some stalls. That's like 8-9 station stalls. I mean, that's not very many charging stations given the number of vehicles that even now are using them in the metro. I guess I would say maybe lean a little more heavy on that, and in that regard too, maybe there's an opportunity on that south wall to look at the addition of solar panels or something that would help provide supplemental energy for those chargers. I think it would be kind of a nice reinforcing message about our commitment to getting off of fossil fuels. Have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, we have. I'll just address your comment on the count of EV charging stalls. We're actually shooting for 20 right now within ramp 7, and designing the infrastructure to be expandable in the future. Obviously, we're in a changing world and dynamic when it comes to alternative fuels, and we have to be reactive to that. So it's certainly an applicable comment. As it relates to solar panels on the south facade of the building, although we are south-facing, there certainly is a limited efficiency that's gained from wall-mounted solar panels. So we're actually looking at other options at this time, but it is something that we'll certainly take as a comment well received, and see if there's something that we can do to kind of express that energy saving to the community.
Commissioners, are there other questions or comments? All right. Seeing none, I will, I guess, add a couple points here and sum up. You know, I think in terms of the connections to the Greenway that were mentioned, you know, I recognize that there are connections to the Greenway, that there are other existing connections to the Greenway in this area. I think that every opportunity we have to create more connections are good ones. You know, we have substantially more connections for automobile drivers in this area, given the block grid, than we do for bicyclists. And that doesn't seem equitable. And so I think that just because there's a connection for a bicycle a block away, I'm not sure how that bears on the relevance of whether or not there should be another connection on this particular block, particularly up to Chicago Avenue, where it's odd that there is not a bicycle connection. You know, I think that both for this project and for the power plant project, in memory of Commissioner Ryan Kronzer, a recent planning commissioner, I will encourage you to think about pedestrian lighting in both those areas. This is a high pedestrian area, the Lake and Chicago area, and obviously up and down Chicago, connecting to and from downtown, both from folks walking through the neighborhood and from Abbott's own customer base and employees. So I encourage you really to think about pedestrian scale lighting along all of those frontages. And then, you know, last, I think I would echo last couple comments about climate. You know, I frankly have a really hard time looking at a project like this and thinking that it's acceptable at all to expand our parking by this degree. You know, the 2040 plan as a policy basis makes pretty clear we need to be reducing the amount of driving trips, and we need to do it really, really fast. And this is taking us in the wrong direction. And as you know, there's induced demand pushes people's behavior in one direction or another. And by providing more parking, that shifts that demand. I recognize the than some other facilities. Perhaps there is a lot of parking in this area, both for the hospital now, for the Midtown Greenway nearby. There is a bonding request and a fully engineered transit line along Chicago Avenue, and another bonding request and fully engineered bus rapid transit line on Lake Street. So you are at the epicenter of transit accessibility, you know, assuming those go through this year, within about 3 years, probably before this ramp is even completed or right around that time. And your added need is several phases away in terms of your kind of domino phasing of this campus plan. And so, you know, not everybody who goes to a hospital can take transit. I recognize that, but many people can, and certainly many of the employees can. And so when I think about the health and welfare finding for the conditional use permit in granting this parking garage and our climate change crisis, it's a tough one. And certainly if it were to move forward, I think seeing extraordinary measures put in place to mitigate for those impacts would be really important. You know, there was a comment that you need to be kind of reactive to the alternative fuels markets. I would argue that if we're all reactive and not proactive, we are in pretty bad shape. So I would ask Alina if it's really looking at being a leader to lead. So those are my comments. To sum up some of the other comments here, you know, I think there was an indication of an interest in, you know, in, well, certainly seeing a more detailed landscaping plan, and perhaps seeing some further kind of design thinking in perforations on metal design. You know, I would encourage certainly, particularly for the automobile entrance to the parking ramps, 40-foot car entrance or 36-foot car entrance is really wide if this goes forward. We have been, you know, really pushing people down at 22 feet. So I would ask you to look at how you can narrow that. And then looking at solar, you know, with this project, rooftop solar, as well as wall solar, and looking at how we can be proactive on that electric vehicle charging stall count, and, you know, really making sure that the conduit's laid for a full full parking garage worth of electric vehicle charging. And I would argue, you know, really setting high targets and limiting those spaces for EVs. So I think that is all we've got on this item, and that concludes our business with item number 11. And that concludes our discussion items all together. Kimberly, do we have any staff announcements or information for the commissioners?
Yes, and just a reminder, we need to receive and file those cow items.
Yes. After back and forth, I forgot that we need to receive and file those. So that does not conclude our discussion items. Could I get a motion to receive and file both items number 10 and 11 for these discussions? Commissioner Smiley.
So moved.
And Commissioner Olson.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Caprini. No.
Aye.
Oh, hi there. Dunick.
Aye.
Smiley.
Aye.
Lipke Peer.
Aye.
Marwa.
Aye.
Meyer.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Motion carries. They are received and filed. Kimberly, are there any other staff updates or informational items?
Yes, and also I just realized it's the irony of talking about cow items with a picture of a giant cow behind me is not lost on me. But we do have one update from the April 13th meeting. We had an appeal of the Portland and Washington mixed use project, the development of the fire station site. There was an appeal of the conditions of approval related to the curb cut on that application, and that will go to the May 5th Biz Committee meeting of the City Council. And we have a fairly robust agenda for the May 11th Planning Commission meeting. After we started taking in new applications after the mayor's order related to the local state of emergency, we had many land use applications that were ready to come in. So you'll be seeing a lot of those on May 11th. And with that, we will have an actual committee of the whole meeting that week on May 14th, which will be a joint hearing between Planning Commission and HPC commissioners.
Hey, Kimberly, quick question. By actual, do you mean virtual actual or
yes, virtual actual? Yes, virtual. All of our meetings, until you hear otherwise, are virtual. I just mean not as part of a regular Planning Commission meeting. And it looks like as far as the motion on the receive and file, Schrader and Sweezy did not get their votes recorded.
Hi, this is Schrader. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'd like to vote aye on that.
Okay, Sweezy.
Voting aye.
Okay, thank you. Then it was 9-0.
All right. This is a work in progress, this whole process. All right. Anything further from either Kimberly or Lisa or anybody else?
Nothing further.
Seeing none. Nothing further. Nothing further until we realize one more thing that I forgot down the road. We'll fix that at the next meeting. All right, with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for this this kind of longer meeting. And thanks for staff and IT again for helping out. This is a challenge, moving and organized and aligned. So that's it does not get taken for granted, and particularly from council chambers, which is like, that's an added step. So thank you.